Hi, who am I speaking with?
Andrew T. Bolster.
How old are you, Andrew?
17, I think.
All right. What happened?
Oh, guess the correct term would be, I snapped. I took my little K-bar there and planted it straight into my mother's back.
And what else happened, Andrew?
Well, she's lying on my floor. Oh, yeah, that's messy. And, my father woke up to her screams. I stabbed the out of him.
Given that it was Halloween, I think it's always in the mind of dispatch that there may be a prank or a hoax when a phone call comes in that is shocking and extraordinary and outside of what they might normally expect, particularly in this small community in a small town in Maine. And pretty quickly, I think the detective realizes that this is likely not a hoax. It starts to give us a very early indication that Andrew Balser has a lot more going on to him psychologically than what may meet the eye initially.
Oh, I stabbed the dog, too. She was barking.
You stabbed the dog as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, a little one.
And you're sure they're dead? Can we get help to them right now?
Yeah, there's no helping them.
Balser sounds jovial. He's laughing. You can almost see him smirking even though you can only hear him. The detective is trying to keep Balser on the phone to give him some time to figure that out, determine if there are any other potential victims nearby, and to decide how best to move forward.
I need you to listen to me, Andrew. Is there anybody else in the house?
Well, my brother was.
It is an all-too-real Halloween horror story. A Winthrop teen is now charged with murdering a couple.
State police say they found the bodies of 47-year-old Alice Balser and her husband, Antonio Balser, inside their home on Pine Knoll Road in Winthrop.
They're very generous, kind people.
Antonio is a retired Coast Guardsman. Alice worked at the Winthrop Veterinary Hospital just down the road.
The couple's 17-year-old son has been charged with their murders.
He was a great kid, smart, brilliant, good in school, focused. Was planning on going to college, so it doesn't make sense. It's a shocker that this could happen.
Andrew, we were hoping to talk to you a little bit. Do you want to sort of summarize what happened, or if I could get a little bit of background first?
Whatever works.
Are you still in high school?
I'm a senior.
How did you like school?
It was alright. I mean, learned things in classes, but never connected to students.
And what classes did you take this year?
Let's see, there was maybe calculus, maybe chemistry, physics, there's a horticulture one in there, and Latin 4.
Okay, so you're quite bright.
Yes.
He self-admits that he's not really connected to other people. He really lacks that ability to form interpersonal relationships. It could be because he doesn't have the empathy to do so. He just doesn't have even the motivation to have that kind of interpersonal interaction that most of us all crave and want. He doesn't desire it.
Is there anything bad about your childhood? Anything really traumatic in your background?
Nothing I can recall.
I'm wondering if you could sort of give me a little bit of clarity about how all of these events that bring you here occur.
I woke up, got lunch. I cranked out my homework for about 4 hours or so. So I took a shower, painted my nails. and just sat about messing about for a while. Just kind of existing, I guess. My mother was, I think she was sleeping. She had a late night, went to a party at one of her friends there. It was like the Halloween dress-up party, whatever.
Okay.
And my father was sound asleep on his chair, so.
Okay, and you're getting along with them fine?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then what happens?
And let's see, I just loaf about till 9 o'clock, then I go lay down in bed. I don't remember much, I just remember it being about 1:30 in the morning. I'm shaking there and I have a knife in my hand.
So you're in your room from about 9 to 1:30 when you find yourself holding the K-bar.
I assume I did. It's really all blurry. I keep a lot of swords and whatnot in my room. This is the thing I'd like to have.
At this point, he's completely dissociated from what's going on. He has this clarity when it comes to what he did after he took a shower. Specifics, but as soon as it comes to the murder, it's all blurry. And he doesn't remember. And I assume that I commit the murder because I had a knife in my hand. These are things that somebody is doing to try to distance themselves. It seems like he's trying to come up with a reason why he's not responsible or trying to defer responsibility, but he doesn't quite know it yet.
Okay, and so what are you thinking at this point?
I'm not really thinking words, I guess. It's just occasionally I just have a tone going through my head. Yeah, it's, what was it? It was 13 kilohertz, I think I've figured it to be around there. So just a high-pitched, constant tone.
Okay. And how is your general physical feeling?
I just don't really feel anything. I do realize that I just, straight up murdered both of my parents there, so I know I should be having some sort of guilt or remorse. But honestly, at the moment, I just don't feel much of anything.
So it's unclear if he's starting to lay the grounds for being incompetent and that maybe he's hearing auditory hallucinations, or if he's talking about this tone as it's a symptom of tinnitus or some medical condition, and it has a parallel to him feeling agitated. We just don't know. But what is also very interesting to hear and shows that he has some self-awareness and insight is that he's saying to the detectives that he should feel bad. He understands that what he just did was significant by society's standards, but he's admitting he doesn't feel anything.
Okay. And can you tell me everything about
You're remembering a bit more clearly now. I was sitting there with a knife. I got up, walked to my parents' bedroom. Both of them were sleeping in there. I reached out my hand to my mother. She hugged me around the neck there. And said something along the lines of, are you just having a rough evening? Come on, let's go to your room. I'll sit with you. And so I walk in with her holding the knife in my hand. I don't think she saw it. And I go to hug her, and as I do, I pull up the knife and snap there.
So just a few moments ago, we heard him describe being unclear of the details of the night, saying that it was blurry. But as they're unfolding now, they actually seem crystal clear. Balser sounds excited about recounting the story, almost proud of an accomplishment, like he's talking about a fish he caught in a tournament, but he's describing killing his mother.
I bring the knife down into her bag. She yells, and my father comes rushing in, and I lunged at him, I suppose. And he fights me back a little bit, trying to push me away and hit me, and I just swing and stand there.
Have you ever thought about killing your mom and dad before?
I'm sure the thought may have crossed my mind, but nothing too substantial ever came of it. I believe was the case there. It was more of a feeling of, pardon my language, just these people, rather than, I'm actually going to kill them.
While there are aspects of Balser's decision-making that seem premeditated, planned, there's an impulsivity overall to what he's done. He's acknowledging that there really wasn't anything specific that set him off on that specific evening at that specific time. When Balser talks about his parents as these effing people, what that may give us is a glimmer into how Balser sees himself relative to most human beings. That maybe because of his intelligence and his academic performance and accomplishments, he's smarter than most people. He may feel he's smarter than both of his parents and disregards them accordingly. And this starts to show us some of that narcissism that we see sometimes in psychopathic individuals, where they think that they are above everybody else.
Is it my understanding that there's a dog that has been injured?
Yeah, I did do that. It was the Chihuahua there, and so I silenced her, I suppose.
So how are you feeling right now as you recount the story to me? Are you feeling any emotion about it?
A little bit of guilt, I suppose it would be, but other than that, it's just kind of not much.
Okay. Did you feel affection towards them yesterday, let's say?
My mother would always be condescending in a way, and my father just honestly looked like he didn't care about it, so.
So Balser is starting to, show his true side again here and how he's failing to accept responsibility. So he's really blaming the victim here and saying that his mother was condescending. But at the same time, it makes me wonder if there was some narcissistic injury that he suffered. Like, he has such a high perception of himself, and he's so superior that when she interacted with him, perhaps it came off as condescending, and he didn't like that because it insulted his ego.
I definitely get that sense that you have such a distance from your dad.
No, it's he's a guy who lives in my house and eats all my food.
Right. And you think your mom was disappointed in you, or?
I honestly can't really read people. So I know she was kind of condescending and a bit almost hypocritical in the things she told me. She, was really being no better word than annoying, I suppose.
He acknowledges he doesn't read people very well, but the disconnect there is that he can't consider or contemplate that it's possible his feelings of contempt and annoyance at what he saw of his mother being hypocritical or hypercritical towards him were possibly just his perceptions and not actually based in fact. He can't draw that link, even though he acknowledges, I don't read people very well. And as a result, he makes a decision based on his rage.
Both of my parents are dead by this time. I figure I should call the police, so that's what I did.
Do you remember saying anything else?
I don't remember, but as I was sitting in the police car, I was just singing a few things to pass the time, I suppose.
Pass the time? Yes. Okay, what were you singing?
It's Luciano Pavarotti.
You had said that you hadn't really put thought into the aftermath, but as you're planning it, what does the completion of the goal look like?
just both my parents dead. That was really my only goal in the thing.
Thank you very much for agreeing to this and inviting us in. I appreciate that.
Of course.
Gender identity issues.
Right, and then you were afraid to share with your parents, in particular your father.
The thing is, I did share it with them when I was about 3 or 4 years old, and it was kind of quickly beaten out of me, you know? I never told my brother about it because of fear of what he would do as well, because that's the way my parents had reacted, so.
So these reasons just accumulated one after the other.
Just straight up fear, you know? But it's more than that. I was always, my parents had raised me to kind of think that family comes first. You know, you don't do anything to make the family look bad, to hurt the family.
Going forward, what do you think is going to happen?
What I would like is, I go in the courtroom, plead guilty, I go to the sentencing, they hand me a cookie and a glass of milk, and they say, you're free to go.
What you never hear from Andrea Balser is any acknowledgement about truly the seriousness of this when she's making light of it by drawing parallel to cookies and milk. It's misplaced. It's not an off-the-cuff statement. It really is some indication that Balser might use the words of remorse, but really has no clue what that's about.
But you do feel remorse.
I do. Only a monster would not feel remorse at that kind of thing. You know, I'm not happy that all of this happened. It just traded one hell for another, you know? And I just, if I could take it all back, I would, in a heartbeat.
She says, well, I'm not happy this happened, as if she has suffered in this scenario, when in fact, again, she's the one that inflicted the harm.
While it's not uncommon for adults who have been abused as children to avoid disclosing that abuse, the timing of Balser's disclosure doesn't really support that that is what happened, that there was a delay in reporting. It's important to remember at the outset of this investigation,
he didn't show up for work, and he's never once not shown up for work in the 4 years he's been working for them. So I said no, and that I hadn't seen him since Saturday. And
Homeless gentleman?
he's not homeless. He stays in a place. He pays for a room.
When was the last time you saw him?
Saturday, 5 o'clock. I said, I'll see you tomorrow, Warren, and he was like, okay.
Now I want to address emergency.
I found something in my son's closet wrapped in a plastic bag.
Okay, what was it?
I think it's a human head.
Why do you think it's that?
Because it looks like it. It's all an ear. Sorry, but I think he's still outside. He will most likely go willingly.
What's his name?
His name is Brian, B-R-I-A-N. Last name is Cohees.
Even when you have seasoned detectives and seasoned police officers There's very little that prepares a human being for seeing a harrowing crime scene like this, where a human being has been treated with such a level of disregard that it just tells us this is a high-risk case. And it's somebody who has some level of psychiatric disturbance to be able to do that to another human being.
You want me to talk to him?
Sure, yeah, I'll talk to him.
What
do you want now?
To start back to the beginning and go slow and tell me as many details as you can remember.
So, because I mean, Murray going to jail for the 15 years probably.
I have no idea.
Because
we're at the beginning.
It's murder. I mean, I'm going to jail for 20 probably, but so I figured, why fight it?
Coey's displaying classic psychopathic tendencies where he has absolutely no remorse, no feelings of guilt. He's not offering up any of that. But what he is offering up is how much time he's going to do because of this murder. He's really not identifying what the value of a life is. He doesn't really understand. He's just saying, oh, okay, I'm going to go away for a couple years. There's no empathy towards the victim whatsoever. No understanding of life, feelings, emotions, absolutely none.
Okay. So what's important to me is to learn as much about you and what you did and as I can. Well, as many details as you can give me, the better.
I drive a 2007 Ford 500.
Okay.
And I keep a small 18-inch bat in there for self-defense.
Okay.
And a large kitchen knife in the glove box, both for self-defense. And, let's see. Yeah, it was the night of February 27th. It was a full moon. And I am in a bad state of mind at that time. I have major depressive disorder, so I am not thinking, shall I say, positively.
He's announcing there are weapons in the car. And I'm a sick person. So we could see this as already setting a new frame in the conversation with the interviewer and controlling where it's going to go and then framing how it should be viewed. He's already laying out the stages for what could be described as an excuse or a defense, sort of putting the blame somewhere else.
You start off here.
So we were at the bridge?
Yes, I was at the bridge. There's a road underneath, right? Out under the overpass. And I was driving along, and I see a shape here on the railway track. And I'm like, that's a homeless person. So I grab my knife. I put on 3 layers of gloves because plastic gloves can betray their users because they're so thin, those vinyl gloves, by imprinting your fingerprints through. I pulled back the canvas and I stabbed his neck. He was panicking at first. He was saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? Why? Ah! And I just kept on stabbing his neck. Is it okay if I do a demonstration?
Oh, yeah.
This is him. I was straddled on top of him like this.
As he starts to talk about the details of his attack on the victim, he seems to be getting titillated and aroused by this. And not aroused in the sexual sense of the word, but aroused in the sense that the adrenaline is starting to course.
And he couldn't fight back. And during the time I was growling and making animalistic noises, it was actually surprisingly easy. I was barely breaking a sweat. I thought, oh, this guy, he's going to be tough. But no, it was actually surprisingly easy.
Why were you doing that?
I suppose it was a frenzy.
Okay.
I was so excited. So rushed up on adrenaline and everything. Like just, woo! And I paused and he said, why are you doing this? And I said, I've been wanting to do this for a long time. Murder someone. And then I continued. The whole ordeal lasted about a minute.
minute and a half. All the while, no, actually, after I killed him, I just couldn't stop saying, stinky, dirty, dirty, stinky, stinky. I wasn't smelling anything, but...
And why were you saying that?
I suppose it was just me speaking out my mind at that moment. It was a pouring out of the mind. And then, let's see, I cut open his belly to see his guts. They're really pink. Sorry, that was morbid. And then I cut off his head.
He's not attached to the fact that Warren Barnes is a human being he killed, and that he went on to then dehumanize and humiliate his body, his remains. It sounds like it's something out of a horror movie, but what we also get a sense of is that Brian Cohey was entertained. This was play acting for him. This was him going through the motions of creating his own horror film, creating his own set of memories.
And then I took the head, put it in a leftover pizza box from the dinner a few nights ago. And then I took the hands, put them in the back, drove home, hid the hands and head in my room. I put the outfit I murdered him in the washer.
You were wearing, or?
Yeah. I was wearing a dark blue jumper suit. Those things that the one piece zips up.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any reason you were wearing a dark blue one-piece jumper suit?
Well, you know the movie Halloween, Michael Myers?
Mm-hmm.
He wears one of those, and for Halloween, last year, I bought that as a costume to unmask in my room. And I just associated that piece of that article of clothing with violence. That's why I was wearing it.
Many people with psychopathy, since they don't appreciate the world around them like other people do, may incorporate the ideas they've seen in a film into the act that they act out, because the fantasy world is more interesting to them than the actual world of human relations that they live in.
You said you took, was it the head and the hands?
Mm-hmm.
And what did you put them in?
Well, there's a 3 rule for body.
Okay, tell me about that.
3 hours, rigor mortis sets in, body stiffens. 3 days, the body starts to stink because of decomposition.
Mm-hmm.
3 weeks, the body is starting to seriously decompose.
Right.
3 months, the body is unrecognizable. 3 years, it turns into a skeleton.
And may I ask how you know that?
I've always had a fascination with forensics and with anatomy and physiology.
Cohey proudly talks about what he knows and what he has become a learner of, which is the forensic sciences and how the criminal mind thinks. And he's taken copious notes on various serial killers. What is ironic is that he didn't take many steps to hide his evidence. And his own sort of missteps in his decision-making, the fact that his mother found these remains in the home, speaks to somebody who was looking to get caught, because it's not spectacular if it only lives in your head.
I actually think you're really articulate. And you talked about you were just kind of in a bad space that night.
It was, yes.
Okay. Why were you in a bad space?
For years, I was wondering what murder would feel like. Because read like Ted Bundy and the Zodiac, they all say murder is the best feeling in the world. So I'm like, I'm going to try that. So for some time I had been wondering when it would happen. I always knew I would be in this building, whether it was as a criminal or a police officer.
I think there's a lot in that comment, right? The criminal is someone who's not obeying social rules. Police officer is someone who has a lot of authority over other people. But I think it's more of the access to people and power and control issue that would be appealing to someone with psychopathy.
Were you worried about, like, leaving evidence behind or being caught?
Well, I was figuring the police don't, this is not to be taken offense, but police, they don't seem to care as much about high-risk individuals, homeless people, prostitutes, etc. So I was deliberately looking for someone who lived that type of life.
Okay.
And I found a homeless person, and the original goal was just in there.
Coey's choosing a victim that he thinks no one will know is missing, so he can actually complete the act of killing. This is a new thing for him. He hasn't done this before. So he doesn't want to engage in a struggle. He doesn't want it to be interfered with. He wants to accomplish this act to get that feeling of excitement and arousal.
Okay. So before this guy, how close had you come in the past?
Not at all.
Not at all? You just drive around? And
yeah, look, just try and find
someone. Anybody interesting?
No. Well, occasionally when you see girls walking down the street, I take a glance at them. I'm quite inept with women. I'm being honest, I'm no Casanova. But half of me says, I want to take that girl home and make her feel nice. And the other half of me, it's just like what Ed said, is I want to see what her head looks like on a stick.
How about animals? Have you practiced on anything?
Yes.
It's a pretty big step.
Tell us about that.
Person.
It was 2018, Halloween. A stray black cat had been coming around our house. This was before I moved into my mom's. This was at my dad's. And I was thinking about killing him. I then hid the body in a shoebox, and then I disposed it in the trash and got away with it.
And when did you start thinking about killing people?
6 months ago.
Coey talks about his experience killing a cat, and it's a miniature prelude to killing a human and cutting them open and taking their head off. And we do see that in many instances of people who are psychopathic, who then go on to kill people. They've done rehearsal. They've tortured animals, or they've hurt other kids. Those are all sort of the baby steps toward the bigger act of killing a human.
Was it like something all of a sudden one day you woke up and thought I'll kill someone, or was it a gradual?
It was gradual, I think. Well, in high school, last year, my parents found a kit I had been assembling. It had hammers, shovels, knives, large zip ties, duct tape, saw. That was meant for hurting people. And it was an ultimatum where if I didn't throw it away, they would call the police.
What we know about Brian Cohey's time in school and as a student is that there were a multitude of red flags. Reviewing some of the entries from Cohey's journals, they can best be summarized as a self-created encyclopedia on murder, on harm of human beings, and glorifying psychopathic behavior. There was also an incident of a third-degree assault where he created a homemade weapon, a homemade mace, and swung it around into one of the other students' heads.
So what was the plan back then?
The plan was to go find, because there's no prostitutes in Grand Junction, I don't think. Have you ever had any sex crimes?
There's not prostitutes like 5 of them standing alongside the road, but there's prostitutes in Grand Junction.
The plan was to go with one of them and have them come with me. And then the plan was to subdue them and tie them up and then torture her. That would have been sexual in nature. This was just to see what it felt like. But that would have been sexual.
He was practicing. Because if he can perfect that, then he can take that to the next level and add in that sexual component. And that would make sense for someone like Coey, who doesn't have any history of personal relationships, let alone with females. And so this might be a way of him seeing what it's like to be with a female, but controlling and abusing them and getting them to the point where they are in such fear of their life that it's also giving him sexual gratification off of that.
What did it feel like?
It was intense. It was a rush of adrenaline.
Well, did you enjoy it or not enjoy it?
Did I enjoy it? I don't know. Just sort of neutral of the whole thing. I didn't enjoy it, but I didn't hate it.
What might be most disturbing when Coey talks about how it felt for him, he's a bit deflated. Coey's desire to seek a thrill and get a high or an adrenaline rush, it didn't even really last. So what happens for a person like Brian Coey if that thrill seeking and that adrenaline rush is short-lived? After doing that much destruction to a human being, that part I think is incredibly scary to think about.
So when you first started looking for him, was that your intention, like, when you started?
Yeah, when I was driving, I was always looking for someone.
Okay. So, given what you've been thinking about and all the other things, do you believe you thought you wanted to be a serial killer?
Only if it brought me fame. For a while, I was willing to do anything, good or bad. Just to gain notoriety, fame, influence.
A Mason County teen accused in the brutal murder of a local homeless man has pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. 19-year-old Brian Coey entered the plea in person during his arraignment in Mason County Court this morning. During a hearing in September, an investigator told the court he believed Coey suffered from mental illness and depression, among other conditions.
In general, when we think about competency evaluations, we're thinking about, at the time of the crime, did they understand the difference between right and wrong? Brian.
October 3rd, 1984. The afternoon looked ordinary. The kind of afternoon that disappears from memory the moment it ends. A pale autumn sun hung over the quiet countryside of Ontario, casting long shadows across narrow roads and open fields. Trees dressed in shades of amber and gold swayed gently in the cool breeze. School buses followed their usual routes. Parents prepared dinners. Children raced bicycles down familiar streets, convinced that tomorrow would be exactly the same as today. Nothing about that Wednesday suggested that it would become one of the most haunting dates in Canadian criminal history. Yet somewhere within those peaceful hours, a little girl vanished. And for 36 years, her voice would remain trapped inside a mystery that refused to die. Her name was Christine Jessup. She was 9 years old. She loved animals. She loved drawing. She loved the simple, uncomplicated things that only children know how to love. She lived in a world measured not by years but by birthdays, school projects, and dreams that stretched endlessly into the future. But on that afternoon, the future ended. No one witnessed the exact moment. No one heard a scream. No one saw the line between safety and horror being crossed. One moment Christine was part of the landscape of a small rural community. The next, she was gone. What followed would become a nightmare that consumed families, investigators, journalists, lawyers, politicians, and eventually an entire nation. Because this was never just a murder. It was a story of grief. A story of obsession. A story of a desperate search for answers. And perhaps most disturbingly, it became a story about what happens when the need to find a monster becomes stronger than the need to find the truth. For decades, Canadians believed they knew who had taken Christine Jessup's life. They believed the case had been solved. They believed justice had been served. They were wrong. The truth was buried beneath years of assumptions, flawed investigations, and courtroom battles. While one man watched his life collapse under the weight of suspicion, the real killer walked free. Free to wake up each morning. Free to smile at neighbors. Free to move through ordinary days carrying a secret darker than anyone could imagine. And the most chilling part? The person responsible may have been standing closer to the tragedy than anyone realized. Closer to the family. Closer to the community. Closer to the investigation itself. For years, the case seemed frozen in time. Evidence aged. Witnesses forgot details. Memories blurred. Entire generations grew up hearing fragments of the story without expecting answers to ever come. The file became what investigators call a cold case. A phrase that sounds clinical. A phrase that sounds neat. But there is nothing neat about a cold case. A cold case is a wound that never closes. It is a family setting an extra place in their hearts for someone who never came home. It is birthdays celebrated in silence. It is parents lying awake decades later wondering whether the final moments were filled with fear. It is a photograph slowly fading while the pain remains untouched. For the Jessup family, time moved forward because it had to. The world changed around them. Technology advanced. Governments changed. Children born after Christine's disappearance became adults. Still, the question remained. Who killed Christine Jessup? Investigators believed they had the answer. Then science arrived with a different story. A story hidden inside microscopic fragments of DNA. A story that had waited patiently for decades. A story powerful enough to overturn assumptions that had shaped lives. The discovery would shock Canada. Not because it revealed an unknown stranger, but because it revealed how easily certainty can become a trap. How easily a community can convince itself that suspicion equals guilt. How easily justice can lose its way. Long before the truth emerged, however, there was only darkness. Imagine standing in a quiet rural neighborhood as evening approaches. The temperature begins to fall. Leaves scrape softly across pavement. Porch lights flicker on one by one. Families gather for dinner. Children return home. Except one. At first, nobody panics. A child is late. Perhaps she stopped at a friend's house. Perhaps she wandered farther than expected. Perhaps she lost track of time. Parents make phone calls. Neighbors ask questions. People begin checking yards, roads, and nearby fields. Minutes become hours. The sky grows darker. Concern transforms into fear. And fear transforms into something far worse. Because deep down, every parent recognizes a moment when ordinary explanations stop making sense. The Jessup family reached that moment. Then crossed it. As darkness settled over the countryside, a horrifying realization emerged. Christine was not simply late. Christine was missing. The distinction changed everything. Search efforts expanded. Volunteers appeared. Police became involved. Roads were checked. Properties were searched. Questions spread through the community faster than answers. People locked doors that had never been locked before. Parents called children inside earlier than usual. The illusion of safety began to crack. No community likes to imagine evil living nearby. Most people prefer to believe danger comes from somewhere else. A distant city. A faceless stranger. A headline on television. Not here. Not among familiar roads and familiar faces. But when a child disappears without explanation, that comforting belief starts to collapse. Someone knew something. Someone had seen something. Someone was responsible. The problem was figuring out who. Days passed. Then weeks. The search continued. Hope faded slowly, stubbornly refusing to disappear completely. Families of missing children often describe living between two worlds. One world tells them to prepare for tragedy. The other begs them to keep believing. The human mind clings to hope even when evidence grows scarce. Especially when the missing person is a child. Especially when the child is only 9 years old. For nearly 3 months, uncertainty ruled every conversation surrounding Christine Jessup. People searched. People speculated. People prayed. But the answers remained hidden. Then came December 31st, 1984. The final day of the year. While most families prepared to welcome a new year, another chapter of this nightmare was about to begin. Far from the place where Christine had disappeared, a grim discovery waited in a rural field. The landscape was cold and silent. Winter had stripped much of the color from the countryside. The earth seemed frozen beneath the weight of the season. And there, among that lonely landscape, lay the evidence everyone feared. The search for a missing child was over. The search for a killer had begun. The discovery shattered whatever hope remained. Christine Jessup had not wandered away. She had not been lost. She had not run away. She had been taken. And she had been murdered. The details investigators uncovered painted a picture too horrific for many Canadians to comprehend. A 9-year-old child. Abducted. Sexually assaulted. Killed. The brutality of the crime shocked the nation. News coverage intensified. Public pressure exploded. Communities demanded answers. Police faced mounting expectations. Someone had to be found. Someone had to pay. And in the years ahead, that pressure would become one of the most important forces shaping everything that followed. Because when a crime is horrifying enough, society becomes desperate for closure. Desperate enough to accept certainty. Desperate enough to stop asking questions. Desperate enough to overlook doubt. That desperation would change lives forever. A suspect emerged. Investigators focused their attention. The case appeared to move forward. Many people felt relief. The nightmare seemed close to ending. But appearances can be deceptive. Behind closed doors, cracks already existed. Small cracks. Easy to ignore. Easy to dismiss. Yet history has shown that some of the greatest miscarriages of justice begin exactly that way. Not with obvious corruption. Not with dramatic conspiracies. But with assumptions. With tunnel vision. With the dangerous belief that investigators have found the right answer and merely need evidence to support it. Years later, when the truth finally emerged, many people would look back and ask the same question. How did this happen? How did a case that seemed solved become one of Canada's most infamous examples of wrongful conviction? How did the real killer avoid detection for decades? And how many warning signs were missed along the way? Those questions would not receive immediate answers. Instead, they would linger. Growing heavier with every passing year. Growing more painful for everyone connected to the case. Because beneath the headlines and court proceedings stood a simple reality that could never be forgotten. A little girl had lost her life. A family had lost a daughter. And somewhere, hidden behind layers of lies, mistakes, and unanswered questions, the truth was still waiting. Waiting through the 1980s. Waiting through the 1990s. Waiting through the turn of a century. Waiting for science to catch up with a mystery. Waiting for technology capable of hearing a voice preserved inside decades-old evidence. Waiting for the day when the dead could finally tell investigators what the living could not. That day would eventually come. But before justice could approach the truth, countless lives would be altered forever. Careers would rise and fall. Families would suffer. A man would be branded a murderer. A killer would remain free. And the name Christine Jessup would become permanently woven into the history of Canadian crime. This is the story of that tragedy. A story that begins with a child walking through an ordinary autumn afternoon. A story that descends into darkness, confusion, and controversy. A story that reveals both the power and the failures of the criminal justice system. And above all, a story about how the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of waiting patiently in the shadows until the world is finally ready to see it. Queensville, Ontario, in 1984 was the kind of place where people rarely locked their doors. It was not a town that appeared on national television. It was not a place known for crime, controversy, or tragedy. It existed quietly among stretches of farmland and country roads, a small rural community where life followed familiar rhythms and where neighbors often knew one another by name. In many ways, Queensville represented a version of Canada that people like to imagine still exists today. Peaceful. Predictable. Safe. The roads that wound through the community were bordered by fields that changed with the seasons. During summer, they glowed beneath endless sunlight. During autumn, they transformed into a patchwork of gold and brown. The horizon felt open and endless, interrupted only by clusters of trees, family homes, and the occasional barn standing against the sky. For children growing up there, the world felt enormous and secure at the same time. Parents allowed their sons and daughters freedoms that might seem impossible today. Children walked home from school. They explored nearby woods. They rode bicycles until sunset. The dangers that dominated headlines in large cities felt distant, almost unreal. People trusted their surroundings. That trust would later become one of the most heartbreaking aspects of this story. Because evil rarely announces its arrival. Sometimes it appears in places where people least expect it. Sometimes it arrives quietly, slipping unnoticed through communities built on trust. By the autumn of 1984, the Jessup family had become part of the landscape of Queensville. They were not wealthy. They were not famous. They were simply a family building a life within a close-knit rural community. Like countless families across Canada, their days revolved around work schedules, school calendars, household responsibilities, and the endless small moments that define ordinary life. Those moments often seem insignificant while they are happening. A conversation at breakfast. A ride to school. A reminder to finish homework. A quick goodbye before leaving the house. Yet after tragedy strikes, those ordinary memories become treasures. People replay them endlessly. Searching for details. Searching for meaning. Searching for one final opportunity to hold on to the person they lost. The world Christine Jessup inhabited was a world of childhood innocence. At 9 years old, she lived in the space between dependence and independence. Old enough to explore, young enough to believe that adults could fix almost anything. Children at that age carry a remarkable confidence in the goodness of the world. They trust familiar faces. They assume tomorrow will arrive. They rarely imagine that danger can hide behind ordinary appearances. That innocence shaped every part of Christine's life. The Canada of the early 1980s was different from today's world in ways that are difficult to fully appreciate. There were no smartphones. No GPS tracking. No social media capable of spreading information instantly. When children left home, parents often relied on little more than trust and routine. A child was expected back at a certain time. If they were late, concern gradually replaced confidence. Communication moved slower. Information traveled slower. Investigations moved slower. When someone disappeared, there were no instant alerts appearing on millions of screens. Communities depended on phone calls, local news reports, posters, volunteers, and word of mouth. The limitations of that era would later influence every stage of the Christine Jessup investigation. But in October of 1984, nobody was thinking about investigations. Nobody was thinking about forensic science. Nobody was imagining future courtroom battles. Life was simply unfolding as it always had. The air had begun to cool with the arrival of autumn. Leaves drifted from trees and gathered along roadsides. The scent of earth and fallen foliage lingered across the countryside. Days grew shorter. Sunsets arrived earlier. Children returned to school after summer vacation and settled into familiar routines. There is something uniquely nostalgic about autumn in rural Ontario. The season carries both beauty and melancholy. The landscape becomes richer in color even as nature prepares for winter. Golden afternoons are followed by colder evenings. The year feels as though it is quietly winding down. In communities like Queensville, those seasonal rhythms shaped daily life. Farmers monitored weather patterns. Families prepared for colder months ahead. Children adjusted to school schedules after the freedom of summer. Everything moved according to patterns that seemed permanent. And perhaps that is why what happened next felt so impossible. When tragedy strikes a place that considers itself safe, the shock extends far beyond the crime itself. It attacks the community's identity. People begin asking questions they never expected to ask. How well do we know our neighbors? How safe are our children? Could something like this happen here? Those questions would eventually haunt Queensville. But before fear arrived, there was normality. An ordinary Wednesday. An ordinary afternoon. An ordinary family. The kind of day that would have disappeared into memory had events unfolded differently. The Jessup household, like many others, operated according to routines. School. Meals. Work. Family responsibilities. The simple structure that keeps daily life moving forward. There was comfort in that structure. Predictability creates a sense of security. People rarely notice it until it vanishes. The community surrounding them shared similar routines. School buses followed established routes. Children climbed aboard each morning. Teachers greeted students. Parents headed to work. Neighbors exchanged casual greetings. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing seemed threatening. The world appeared exactly as it should. Yet hidden within that ordinary environment existed a reality that nobody could see. A predator does not always stand out. A dangerous person does not always look dangerous. One of the most unsettling truths in criminal investigations is that the individuals capable of terrible acts often blend seamlessly into everyday life. They shop in familiar stores. They wave to neighbors. They attend community events. They exist behind ordinary smiles. The contrast between appearance and reality would become a central theme of the Christine Jessup case. Because years later, when investigators finally identified the man responsible, many people struggled to reconcile the image they remembered with the crime that had occurred. The setting of this story matters because it helps explain the devastation that followed. Large cities sometimes develop a degree of emotional distance from crime. Violence becomes a statistic, a headline, a brief segment on the evening news. But in a small rural community, tragedy feels personal. Everyone knows someone connected to the victim. Everyone imagines their own family in similar circumstances. Everyone feels vulnerable. The disappearance of a child does not remain confined to one household. It spreads through schools, churches, workplaces, and neighborhoods. Fear becomes communal. Grief becomes communal. The entire community suffers. That is exactly what happened in Queensville. As news of Christine's disappearance eventually spread, daily life began changing in subtle ways. Parents became more cautious. Children were watched more closely. Conversations that once focused on weather or local events shifted toward concern and uncertainty. The atmosphere transformed. Trust weakened. People looked at familiar surroundings through unfamiliar eyes. But before any of that occurred, Queensville remained a place suspended in ordinary time. A place where children still laughed on playgrounds. A place where families planned for upcoming holidays. A place where nobody imagined they were standing on the edge of a tragedy that would be discussed for decades. The wider region surrounding Queensville reflected the same quiet character. Country roads stretched between communities. Vehicles were relatively sparse compared to urban centers. Fields extended toward distant tree lines. At night, darkness settled heavily across the landscape. Without the glow of large cities, evenings felt deeper and quieter. The silence itself became part of rural life. That silence would later acquire a haunting significance. Investigators would spend years trying to reconstruct movements along those roads. Trying to understand who traveled where. Trying to determine how a child could disappear seemingly without a trace. Trying to identify the moments hidden within the silence. Yet during those final days before everything changed, nobody saw a mystery unfolding. Life continued normally. Children attended school. Families prepared meals. People planned weekends. The future still felt predictable. One of the cruelest aspects of true crime is its ability to transform ordinary memories into sacred artifacts. A school photograph becomes evidence of innocence. A family snapshot becomes a reminder of what was lost. A familiar street becomes part of a crime scene narrative. The places connected to Christine Jessup would eventually acquire that transformation. Roads that once carried no significance became important. Locations that once appeared ordinary became forever linked to the investigation. The geography itself changed meaning. Not physically. Emotionally. Psychologically. For the people who lived there, nothing would ever feel entirely ordinary again. Years later, many residents would still remember where they were when they first heard about Christine's disappearance. Memory has a strange way of preserving moments associated with tragedy. People forget thousands of routine days. Yet they remember exactly where they stood when life changed. Exactly what the weather felt like. Exactly how the news reached them. Exactly how their stomach dropped as reality settled in. The story of Christine Jessup begins within this setting because context matters. This was not merely a location on a map. It was a living community. A network of families. A place built upon familiarity and trust. Understanding that world helps explain why the crime created such profound shock. A stranger committing violence is frightening. The possibility that danger existed within familiar circles is terrifying. That fear would eventually influence public opinion. It would influence investigative decisions. It would influence courtroom proceedings. And it would contribute to mistakes that altered lives. The tragedy that unfolded was not confined to a single day. Its consequences stretched across decades. Children who grew up hearing about the case eventually became adults. Investigators retired. Technology evolved. Entire chapters of Canadian legal history were shaped by what happened. Yet all of those future developments began here. In a quiet rural community. Among autumn leaves and country roads. Within a world that believed itself safe. A world where a 9-year-old girl still dreamed about the future. A world where her family expected another ordinary evening together. A world completely unaware that history was already moving toward them. The sun would rise and set over Queensville countless times after October 1984. Seasons would change. Fields would bloom and fade. Years would become decades. But the shadow cast across that community would remain. Because some places become permanently connected to a moment. A single event divides time into before and after. Before the disappearance. Before the investigation. Before the grief. Before the questions. And then after. Everything that follows belongs to the after. And for Queensville, that dividing line was approaching with every passing hour. Before Christine Jessup became a headline, before her name appeared in newspapers across Canada, before investigators filled boxes with reports and evidence, she was simply a little girl living an ordinary childhood. And perhaps that is the most important thing to remember. True crime stories often become consumed by killers, investigations, courtroom battles, and shocking discoveries. The victim slowly fades into the background while the mystery takes center stage. Names become case files. Lives become evidence. But Christine was not a case. She was a child. A daughter. A sister. A friend. A 9-year-old girl whose world should have been filled with years that never arrived. When people looked at Christine, they saw the bright energy that so often defines childhood. She was young enough to still view the world through the lens of imagination, yet old enough to develop her own interests, opinions, and dreams. Her life existed in small moments. The moments that seem insignificant while they are happening. The moments families expect to have forever. A ride to school. A conversation at the dinner table. Laughter shared with friends. Arguments over chores. Plans for the weekend. The ordinary details that become priceless after someone is gone. The Jessup family knew Christine not as a victim but as a living presence within their home. She occupied space in their daily routines. She left traces of herself everywhere. A school project resting on a table. Clothes folded in a bedroom. Drawings tucked into notebooks. Personal treasures that only made sense to a child. Every family develops a rhythm around its children. Parents organize their lives around school schedules and activities. Brothers and sisters build habits around one another's presence. Over time, those routines become so familiar that nobody notices them. Until suddenly they disappear. Then every missing detail becomes impossible to ignore. An empty chair. A silent bedroom. A place at the table that no longer feels complete. For the Jessup family, those absences would become permanent reminders of a future stolen before it had a chance to unfold. In 1984, however, that future still appeared limitless. Christine stood at the beginning of life. 9 years old. An age filled with possibility. Children at that stage often move through life with remarkable confidence. They believe adulthood is far away. They believe tomorrow is guaranteed. They believe bad things happen somewhere else. The world feels large and exciting. Even small adventures feel important. A walk down a familiar road can become an expedition. A patch of trees can become a kingdom. A bicycle can become freedom. The imagination transforms ordinary places into extraordinary landscapes. That is the beauty of childhood. And that is why crimes against children strike such a powerful emotional chord. They do not simply end lives. They destroy futures. Every murdered child represents years that never happen. Birthdays that never arrive. Friendships that never form. Dreams that never become reality. The loss extends beyond what existed. It includes everything that could have existed. Christine's family undoubtedly imagined countless possibilities for her future. Perhaps she would attend university. Perhaps she would build a career. Perhaps she would one day have children of her own. Those dreams are natural. Parents begin imagining their children's futures almost from the moment they are born. Every achievement becomes a stepping stone toward tomorrow. Every milestone hints at what might come next. No parent imagines that future ending at 9 years old. No parent prepares for that possibility. The photographs of Christine that survive today offer glimpses into a life interrupted. A smiling child. Bright eyes. A face untouched by the burdens of adulthood. When people see those photographs now, they view them through the lens of tragedy. But at the time they were taken, nobody saw a victim. They saw a child. A girl growing up. A girl expected to continue growing up. That distinction matters. Because tragedy often rewrites memory. People look backward and search for clues. They wonder whether danger was somehow visible. Whether warning signs existed. Whether fate left hints behind. But childhood photographs rarely contain such answers. They capture innocence. Nothing more. Nothing less. For Christine's family, the autumn of 1984 likely felt similar to countless previous autumns. School had resumed. The seasons were changing. Life moved forward according to familiar routines. Parents focused on responsibilities. Children focused on childhood. The future stretched comfortably ahead. There was no reason to believe anything was wrong. No reason to believe that ordinary routines would soon become sacred memories. One of the most heartbreaking realities experienced by families after a loss is the realization that they never knew which moment would be the last. The last goodbye. The last conversation. The last smile. The last ordinary day. Those moments only gain significance afterward. At the time, they appear completely routine. That truth would haunt the people who loved Christine. Somewhere within the ordinary flow of life existed a final normal day. A final normal morning. A final normal conversation. Nobody recognized them as final. How could they? Life does not announce when everything is about to change. It simply changes. Christine attended school like any other child. Classrooms in 1984 were filled with the familiar sounds of education and childhood. Teachers giving instructions. Students exchanging whispers. Pencils scratching across paper. Laughter erupting unexpectedly. the ordinary soundtrack of growing up. For children, school often serves as the center of daily life. It is where friendships form, where personalities develop, where memories accumulate. The adults surrounding Christine likely saw her as one among many students navigating the normal challenges of childhood. Nobody looking at her that day could have imagined the role she would later occupy in Canadian history. Nobody could have predicted that her name would become associated with one of the country's most infamous criminal investigations. To them, she was simply Christine, a child finishing another school day. The tragedy of her story lies partly in its normality. There was nothing extraordinary about the victim. No dangerous lifestyle. No connection to criminal circles. No circumstances commonly associated with violence. Christine represented exactly the kind of child communities expect to protect. Exactly the kind of child people assume is safe. That innocence intensified public outrage when details eventually emerged. Canadians did not see a distant victim. They saw their own children. Their own daughters. Their own families. The emotional response extended far beyond Queensville because Christine embodied something universal. Childhood itself. Every parent understands the instinct to protect a child. Every community understands the responsibility. When that protection fails, the resulting grief becomes collective. Even strangers feel it. Even people hundreds of kilometers away feel it. As the years passed, Christine's image remained frozen in time. That is another cruel reality of child homicide. The victim never ages. Photographs preserve them exactly as they were. Meanwhile, everyone else grows older. Parents age. Friends age. Siblings age. The child remains forever suspended in a single moment. Forever 9 years old. Forever smiling from photographs. Forever disconnected from the decades that followed. For the Jessup family, time continued moving despite unimaginable loss. But before loss arrived, there was still hope. Still routine. Still ordinary life. The household likely carried the familiar mixture of affection and chaos found in countless families. Meals needed preparation. Responsibilities required attention. Schedules demanded coordination. Nothing about those routines suggested they would soon be shattered. The power of Christine's story comes partly from understanding who she was before the crime. Not because every detail is known. Many are not. But because recognizing her humanity prevents the case from becoming merely a mystery. A murder investigation can sometimes feel abstract. Evidence. Timelines. Suspects. Forensics. Yet beneath every document stands a human being whose life mattered. Christine's life mattered. Not because her case became famous. Not because it exposed failures within the justice system. Not because it eventually involved groundbreaking forensic science. Her life mattered because she existed. Because she was loved. Because she was part of a family. Because she deserved the future that was taken from her. When communities experience the murder of a child, people often search for explanations that make the event easier to understand. They want to believe there was a reason. A warning sign. Something identifiable. The randomness of evil is difficult to accept. But children like Christine remind us of a painful truth. Sometimes innocence itself becomes vulnerable. Sometimes there is no meaningful explanation capable of reducing the horror. There is only loss. And the desperate search for answers afterward. Years after her death, investigators would analyze evidence using technologies unimaginable in 1984. Lawyers would argue over facts. Experts would examine DNA. Journalists would revisit the case repeatedly. Entire careers would become connected to the search for truth. Yet at the center of every development remained the same child. The same little girl whose story began long before police reports existed. The same little girl whose family once expected nothing more complicated than watching her grow up. That expectation feels heartbreaking in hindsight. Because growth is the defining characteristic of childhood. Children are always becoming something new. Every year reveals another version of who they might become. At 9 years old, Christine's story was still being written. The chapters ahead remained blank. Possibilities remained endless. Nobody knew what kind of woman she would become. Nobody knew where life would lead her. Nobody knew which dreams would survive and which would change. All of that remained unwritten. And then suddenly, impossibly, there were no more chapters. Only questions. Only grief. Only a silence that would echo through decades. As October 1984 continued unfolding, Christine remained unaware of the danger moving toward her. Children rarely recognize threats the way adults do. They view familiar environments through a lens of trust. That trust allows childhood to exist. Without it, innocence becomes impossible. Perhaps that is why stories like Christine's continue to resonate long after the facts become known. People are not merely mourning a victim. They are mourning the destruction of innocence itself. The destruction of a future. The destruction of a family's expectations. And so before the investigation begins, before suspicion spreads, before headlines appear and accusations follow, it is important to pause here. To remember the person at the center of everything. Not the crime. Not the controversy. Not the legal battles. The child. The daughter. The little girl who should have grown older. The little girl who should have experienced countless ordinary tomorrows. The little girl whose life would soon intersect with unimaginable darkness. A darkness that neither she nor anyone around her could yet see approaching. But it was coming. Closer with every passing hour. Closer with every familiar routine. Closer with every ordinary moment. And soon, the world that Christine Jessup knew would disappear forever. October 3rd, 1984 began like countless other school days. There was nothing dramatic about the morning. Nothing that hinted at the horror waiting just beyond the horizon. The sky stretched calmly above rural Ontario. The air carried the cool edge of autumn. Families followed familiar routines that had repeated themselves hundreds of times before. Children prepared for school. Parents focused on responsibilities. Roads slowly filled with the predictable movement of another ordinary weekday. Somewhere within that ordinary rhythm was Christine Jessup. 9 years old. Living a life still defined by childhood. She left home expecting a normal day. The kind of day children rarely remember because nothing unusual happens. Classes. Friends. Assignments. The steady progression of hours until the final school bell. There is a painful irony in tragedies like this. The final day often begins as the most ordinary day imaginable. No warning. No sense of danger. No indication that life is about to divide itself into before and after. For Christine, school ended as it always did. Students gathered belongings. Conversations filled hallways. Children prepared to return home. The world remained familiar. Safe. Predictable. The journey home should have been one of the least remarkable parts of the day. A routine repeated countless times. A path traveled so often that it required little thought. By all appearances, everything unfolded normally. Christine arrived home after school. Nothing seemed wrong. Nothing immediately alarmed anyone. The afternoon stretched ahead with the comfortable freedom children often enjoy after classes end. Parents across the community expected their children to spend time outdoors. It was part of life in a rural environment. Children explored. They played. They visited friends. They rode bicycles. They moved through the neighborhood with a degree of independence that felt natural at the time. That trust formed the foundation of everyday life. Nobody wants to live in a world where every moment requires suspicion. Communities function because people believe their children are safe. The Jessup family believed that. Their neighbors believed that. Queensville believed that. The tragedy waiting ahead would challenge that belief forever. At some point after arriving home, Christine went outside. The details of those moments remain fragmented by time. Certain facts are known. Others disappeared with the passing decades. What remains clear is that she stepped into an ordinary autumn afternoon and never returned. There are moments in missing person cases that seem almost impossible to grasp. Moments where everything changes, yet nobody realizes it. A child walks down a road. A vehicle passes. A conversation occurs. A decision is made. From the outside, the moment appears insignificant. Only later does it reveal its true importance. Somewhere during that afternoon, Christine encountered the person who would end her life. The exact sequence of events remains hidden. No witnesses emerged to describe every detail. No complete timeline exists. The darkness surrounding those moments has never fully lifted. What investigators eventually concluded is that Christine was abducted. Taken against her will. Removed from the ordinary world she knew. The realization is chilling. One moment she existed within the safety of her community. The next she was in the control of someone capable of extraordinary cruelty. Criminal psychologists often discuss the concept of opportunity. Many violent crimes occur because a predator identifies a moment when vulnerability and opportunity intersect. A child alone. A quiet road. A lack of witnesses. A chance encounter. The offender recognizes possibilities invisible to everyone else. That possibility becomes action. And once action begins, events can unfold with terrifying speed. For Christine, that transition from safety to danger may have happened in minutes. Perhaps even seconds. One of the most disturbing aspects of child abduction cases is the silence surrounding them. Popular imagination often envisions dramatic struggles and public confrontations. Reality is frequently different. Predators rely on manipulation. They exploit trust. They create confusion. They use familiarity. Sometimes victims enter vehicles without immediately understanding the danger. Sometimes threats remain hidden until escape becomes impossible. Investigators would spend years trying to understand what happened after Christine disappeared. But the truth is that many details vanished with the killer. Only fragments survived. The known facts paint a horrifying picture. The unknown facts leave room for even darker possibilities. As afternoon drifted toward evening, the first signs of concern began emerging. At first, they likely seemed minor. A child who had not yet returned. A routine interrupted. A schedule slightly off course. Parents often experience these moments. Most resolve quickly. The child arrives home. An explanation follows. Life returns to normal. But occasionally, concern begins growing. Minutes pass. Then more minutes. Questions replace assumptions. Where is she? Who saw her last? Did she mention going somewhere? Has anyone heard from her? Every missing child investigation begins with uncertainty. Nobody wants to imagine the worst. Families search first for ordinary explanations. A friend's house. A forgotten errand. A misunderstanding. The human mind instinctively resists catastrophic possibilities. Hope remains stronger than fear. At least initially. The Jessup family likely experienced that same progression. Concern gradually becoming anxiety. Anxiety gradually becoming fear. Fear gradually becoming panic. The transformation does not happen all at once. It unfolds minute by minute. Hour by hour. Each unanswered question increases the pressure. Each failed attempt to locate the child deepens the dread. Eventually a point arrives where ordinary explanations no longer feel convincing. The situation becomes impossible to ignore. Christine had not returned. Nobody knew where she was. Nobody knew why. The realization spread rapidly through the household. Then beyond it. Phone calls were made. Neighbors became involved. Friends were contacted. People began searching. The atmosphere changed. An ordinary evening transformed into an emergency. Across countless true crime cases, families describe a specific moment when they understood something was terribly wrong. Not merely unusual. Not merely inconvenient. Wrong. a deep instinct warning them that events were moving beyond normal circumstances. That realization often remains unforgettable. It marks the beginning of a nightmare. As darkness approached Queensville, the search intensified. People checked roads, fields, nearby properties, places where children commonly spent time. The community responded quickly because everyone understood the stakes. A missing child is not simply a family crisis. It becomes a collective concern. Neighbors join the search because they imagine their own children, their own families, their own fears. The community mobilized. But the growing effort produced no answers. No sightings. No confirmed location. No explanation. Only uncertainty. As evening deepened, the emotional atmosphere shifted dramatically. Hope remained alive, but it no longer felt comfortable. It became desperate. Every passing hour carried increasing significance. Investigators now understand that the earliest hours following a child abduction are often the most critical. But in 1984, many of the systems and technologies available today simply did not exist. There were no mobile phones tracking movement. No digital surveillance networks. No social media alerts. Search efforts depended largely upon manpower, communication, and luck. The limitations of the era created obstacles that would haunt the investigation for decades. Yet at that moment, nobody was thinking about future forensic challenges. The focus remained singular. Find Christine. Bring her home. The search expanded. Police became involved. Questions multiplied. People retraced possible routes. Every lead mattered. Every rumor demanded attention. The uncertainty affected everyone. Parents looked differently at their own children. Simple activities suddenly seemed dangerous. A community that once felt safe now felt vulnerable. Fear spread quietly through conversations. People locked doors. People stayed alert. People wondered whether a predator was moving among them. What nobody knew was that the crime had already occurred. While searchers desperately scanned roads and fields, the reality they feared had likely already become irreversible. That is one of the cruelest elements of many homicide investigations. Hope survives long after the outcome is determined. Families continue searching. Communities continue praying. Investigators continue working. All while the victim is already gone. The contrast is devastating. For nearly 3 months, uncertainty would dominate the Christine Jessup case. 3 months of questions. 3 months of searching. 3 months of emotional torment. Families of missing persons often describe uncertainty as a unique form of suffering. Grief normally follows death. But uncertainty suspends grief. It traps people between hope and despair. Unable to move forward. Unable to stop imagining possibilities. Every phone call becomes important. Every reported sighting creates renewed hope. Every dead end causes fresh heartbreak. The Jessup family endured that torment while the wider community watched helplessly. Autumn faded. Winter arrived. Temperatures dropped. Leaves disappeared from trees. The landscape transformed. Yet Christine remained missing. The passage of time itself became painful. Each day without answers felt heavier than the last. Investigators worked tirelessly. Volunteers continued searching. Media attention increased. The story spread beyond Queensville. People across Canada learned about the missing 9-year-old girl. They followed developments. They hoped for good news. But good news never came. The longer a child remains missing, the more fear begins replacing optimism. People stop asking when the child will return. They begin asking whether the child will return. It is a devastating shift. One that families desperately resist. Yet reality slowly forces itself into the conversation. The possibility of tragedy grows impossible to ignore. Then came December 31st, 1984. The final day of the year. Across Canada, people prepared to celebrate the arrival of a new year. Families gathered. Plans were made. Calendars prepared to turn. But in a remote field far from where Christine disappeared, another story was reaching its conclusion. The discovery waiting there would transform the investigation forever. It would confirm the fears nobody wanted to voice. It would end uncertainty while creating a different kind of pain. The pain of certainty. The pain of knowing. The pain of confronting a reality far worse than hope had allowed people to imagine. The little girl who left home on an ordinary autumn afternoon would never return. And the search for a missing child would become the hunt for a killer. A hunt that would consume decades. A hunt that would accuse the wrong man. A hunt that would expose failures within the justice system. A hunt that would eventually uncover the truth long after almost everyone believed the mystery would remain unsolved. But all of that lay in the future. The darkness began here. With a child stepping into an ordinary afternoon. With a moment no one noticed. With a predator hidden behind familiarity. And with a disappearance that transformed a peaceful community into the setting of one of Canada's most haunting criminal cases. For 89 days, hope refused to die. It weakened. It suffered. It became increasingly fragile. But it survived. Every morning that passed without answers, the Jessup family faced the same impossible reality. Christine was still missing. There was still no explanation. There was still no certainty. And as long as certainty remained absent, hope continued to exist. That hope was painful. Yet it was also necessary. Families of missing children often cling to the smallest possibilities because the alternative is unbearable. A reported sighting. A rumor. An anonymous phone call. A fragment of information that might lead somewhere. Anything capable of keeping hope alive becomes precious. Autumn disappeared. Winter arrived. Snow and cold transformed the Ontario landscape. Christmas came and went. Families gathered around tables. Children opened gifts. Holiday lights glowed against the darkness of December. Yet for the Jessup family, the season carried an emptiness impossible to escape. One chair remained unfilled. One voice remained absent. One child remained missing. Every celebration became a reminder. Every family photograph highlighted the space where Christine should have been. As the final days of 1984 approached, many people still wanted to believe there would be a miracle. That somehow Christine would be found alive. That somehow the nightmare would end differently. But reality was moving toward a far darker conclusion. December 31st arrived beneath a grey winter sky. The final day of the year. A day normally associated with reflection and anticipation. People looked back at the previous 12 months and prepared to welcome the next. No one knew that hidden within the frozen countryside was a discovery that would forever define the end of 1984. The location was isolated. A rural area far from the place where Christine had vanished. Open land stretched across the winter landscape. Trees stood bare against the cold air. The ground carried the harsh stillness that often accompanies the final days of December in Ontario. Nothing about the scene suggested it was about to become one of the most important locations in Canadian criminal history. Then came the discovery. What had once been a missing person investigation suddenly became something else. Something final. Something devastating. The remains found that day belonged to Christine Jessup. After nearly 3 months of uncertainty, the question of whether she was alive received its answer. And it was the answer everyone feared. The moment investigators confirmed the identity, an entire community experienced a collective heartbreak. Hope vanished. Not gradually. Not over time. Instantly. The possibility of rescue disappeared. The possibility of reunion disappeared. The possibility of a happy ending disappeared. Only grief remained. For Christine's family, the discovery marked the beginning of a different kind of suffering. Before, they had endured uncertainty. Now they faced certainty. As agonizing as uncertainty can be, certainty brings its own cruelty when the truth is tragic. The mind can no longer imagine positive outcomes. The future becomes fixed, permanent, irreversible. Somewhere within that cold rural field lay the proof that a little girl had been stolen from the people who loved her. Investigators immediately understood the significance of the discovery. The scene required careful examination. Every detail mattered. Every object mattered. Every fragment of evidence mattered. Because while the search for Christine had ended, the search for her killer was only beginning. The location itself raised troubling questions. How had Christine been transported there? When had she been brought there? Why had this particular place been chosen? Criminal investigators understand that disposal sites can reveal important information about offenders. Some locations are selected because they are remote. Others because they are familiar. Some reflect planning. Others reflect panic. Every choice made by a killer carries potential significance. The challenge lies in interpreting that significance correctly. As forensic teams began their work, the enormity of the crime became increasingly clear. The evidence indicated that Christine had not simply been killed. She had been abducted. She had been sexually assaulted. She had suffered violence no child should ever experience. The details horrified investigators. They horrified the public. And they intensified pressure on law enforcement to find the person responsible. There are crimes that generate outrage. Then there are crimes that generate something deeper. A sense of collective violation. The murder of a child often falls into that second category. People do not merely feel anger. They feel protective instincts transformed into grief and rage. The victim represents innocence itself. When innocence is destroyed, society reacts powerfully. That reaction soon spread throughout Canada. News reports carried the story beyond Queensville. Television broadcasts reached homes across the country. Newspapers printed photographs of Christine's face. People who had never met her felt connected to the tragedy. Parents looked at their own children differently. Many imagined the terror the Jessup family had endured during those months of uncertainty. Many imagined the devastation of receiving confirmation that hope was gone forever. The emotional impact was immense. But while the public mourned, investigators faced a difficult task. A crime scene discovered months after the murder presents unique challenges. Time destroys evidence. Weather alters environments. Animals can disturb remains. Important clues may disappear. The longer a crime remains hidden, the more complicated the investigation becomes. By the time Christine's remains were discovered, nearly 3 months had passed since her disappearance. That gap complicated everything. Investigators worked carefully to recover every possible piece of evidence. Forensic science in 1984 lacked many of the tools available today. DNA technology was still in its infancy. Many techniques that modern investigators take for granted did not yet exist. As a result, detectives relied heavily on traditional methods. Witness interviews, physical evidence, behavioral analysis, timelines, geographic patterns. Every clue became precious. Every clue carried the possibility of identifying the killer, or misleading investigators entirely. The autopsy provided crucial information. It confirmed the horrifying nature of the crime. It helped establish how Christine had died. It revealed evidence of sexual assault. It painted a picture of violence that shocked even experienced investigators. Yet despite those findings, the autopsy could not answer the most important question. Who had done this? That question now dominated the investigation. Somewhere out there was a person responsible for the murder of a 9-year-old child. Someone who had spent nearly 3 months living with knowledge of what happened. Someone who had watched news coverage. Someone who had likely heard discussions about the search. Someone who knew the truth while everyone else searched for answers. That realization troubled investigators deeply. The killer was not a shadow. Not an abstract concept. Not a faceless monster from a story. The killer was a real person. A person moving through everyday life. Perhaps working. Perhaps socializing. Perhaps interacting with people who had no idea what he had done. The contrast is one of the most unsettling aspects of criminal investigations. A community mourns. A family suffers. Meanwhile, the offender continues living among ordinary people. The discovery site became the focus of intense scrutiny. Investigators searched for signs that might reveal the offender's connection to the area. Was the location familiar to him? Had he visited before? Did he live nearby? Did he work nearby? Criminal profiling often begins with such questions. People rarely make decisions randomly. Patterns exist. Preferences exist. Behavior leaves traces. The challenge lies in recognizing those traces before they disappear. As evidence accumulated, investigators began constructing theories. Theories about the offender. Theories about the abduction. Theories about the sequence of events. Every investigation requires hypotheses. Detectives must develop potential explanations and then test them against available evidence. But theories can become dangerous if they harden into assumptions. That danger would eventually play a major role in this case. At the time, however, investigators were still searching broadly. The field where Christine's remains were discovered represented both an ending and a beginning. An ending because uncertainty had finally been resolved. A beginning because the homicide investigation was now fully underway. Every resource available would be directed toward identifying the killer. The pressure was extraordinary. Public attention intensified dramatically after the discovery. People demanded answers. Media organizations demanded updates. Political figures monitored developments. The murder of a child creates urgency unlike almost any other crime. The expectation is simple. Find whoever did this. Find them quickly. Bring them to justice. That expectation can motivate investigators. It can also create dangerous pressure. Because urgency sometimes encourages shortcuts. Because public outrage sometimes rewards certainty over caution. Because the desire to solve a case can become stronger than the commitment to question assumptions. Years later, many observers would look back at the Christine Jessup investigation and wonder whether those pressures influenced crucial decisions. But at this stage, nobody could see the future. Nobody knew how complicated the road ahead would become. Nobody knew that the case would eventually involve one of the most notorious wrongful convictions in Canadian history. Nobody knew that the real killer would remain unidentified for decades. All they knew was that a child had been murdered. And a killer remained free. The emotional atmosphere surrounding the case changed after the discovery. During the missing person phase, hope and fear existed together. Now fear dominated. People wanted accountability. People wanted arrests. People wanted reassurance that the threat had been removed. Communities often seek emotional closure following shocking crimes. The identification of a suspect can provide that closure even before guilt is proven. That tendency is understandable. It is also dangerous. Because emotional certainty and factual certainty are not always the same thing. The evidence recovered from Christine's remains would eventually become central to the future of the case. At the time, however, investigators could not fully appreciate its significance. Technology had not yet advanced far enough. Some answers remained trapped within biological evidence, waiting decades for science to unlock them. That hidden truth remained silent. Silent through the remainder of the 1980s. Silent through courtroom battles. Silent through public controversy. Silent while an innocent man lost years of his life. The evidence already contained the identity of the killer. The world simply lacked the tools necessary to read it. For now, detectives focused on the information available to them. Witnesses. Timelines. Relationships. Potential suspects. The hunt intensified. And with each passing day, the pressure grew stronger. The discovery of Christine's remains transformed the investigation into a race against uncertainty. A race to identify a predator before memories faded further. A race to find justice for a child whose life ended far too soon. A race that would eventually produce answers. but not before producing devastating mistakes. Standing in that frozen field on the final day of 1984, investigators could not know how long the journey ahead would be. They could not know that decades would pass before the truth emerged. They could not know that the evidence beneath their feet already held the key to solving the mystery. All they knew was that a little girl had been found. That innocence had been destroyed. And that somewhere beyond the winter horizon, the person responsible was still walking free. The discovery of Christine Jessop's remains answered one question and created 100 more. Investigators now knew that the 9-year-old girl they had searched for throughout the autumn and winter was dead. They knew she had been abducted. They knew she had been sexually assaulted. They knew she had been murdered. But they still did not know who had done it. And in a case as emotionally explosive as this one, that uncertainty became unbearable. The pressure arrived from every direction. The public wanted answers. The media wanted updates. Political leaders wanted progress. Most importantly, a grieving family wanted justice. Every investigator assigned to the case understood the weight of those expectations. A child killer was somewhere out there. The longer he remained unidentified, the more anxiety spread through the community. People worried that he might strike again. Parents looked at strangers differently. Neighbors became more suspicious of one another. Trust, once damaged, proved difficult to restore. As weeks turned into months, detectives pursued lead after lead. Some appeared promising. Others collapsed almost immediately. Tips flooded in from members of the public. Witnesses reported unusual vehicles. People recalled suspicious conversations. Rumors circulated throughout Queensville and surrounding communities. The challenge facing investigators was enormous. In major criminal investigations, information is both a blessing and a curse. A large volume of tips creates opportunities. It also creates distractions. For every useful lead, there may be dozens of dead ends. Every possibility requires time. Every possibility requires resources. Every possibility carries the risk of pulling investigators away from the truth. The Christine Jessop investigation soon entered a phase familiar to many major homicide cases. The search for suspects. At first, detectives cast a wide net. They examined known offenders. They reviewed individuals with histories of violence. They interviewed people connected to the community. They looked at anyone who might conceivably have crossed paths with Christine. This process is essential in criminal investigations. But it also introduces danger. Because once investigators begin focusing on particular individuals, human psychology becomes a factor. And human psychology is rarely perfect. One of the most common investigative failures is something known as tunnel vision. Tunnel vision occurs when investigators become convinced they have identified the correct suspect and begin interpreting evidence through that assumption. Instead of asking whether a suspect is guilty, they begin asking how to prove guilt. The difference may seem subtle. In reality, it can alter the course of an entire case. At first, nobody recognized that danger emerging within the Christine Jessop investigation. Detectives believed they were moving steadily toward the truth. They believed they were narrowing possibilities. They believed they were doing exactly what good investigators are supposed to do. Eventually, their attention settled on a man named Guy Paul Morin. Morin lived near the Jessop family. He was part of the broader community. He was not a stranger from another province. He was not a mysterious drifter passing through town. He was someone connected to the area. Someone visible. Someone accessible. The moment investigators begin focusing on a specific suspect, an investigation changes character. Questions become more targeted. Interviews become more intensive. Evidence begins to organize itself around a central theory. For detectives, the theory involving Morin started gaining momentum. Certain circumstances appeared suspicious. Certain observations seemed significant. The pieces appeared to fit. At least initially. Looking back decades later, it is easy to see the weaknesses. But investigations do not happen with the benefit of hindsight. They happen in real time, under pressure, amid uncertainty, within environments where incomplete information often feels persuasive. As investigators increased their focus on Maureen, public attention followed. People naturally gravitate toward explanations. A suspect provides an explanation. A suspect transforms uncertainty into narrative. Suddenly there is a face connected to the crime. A name attached to public fear. For communities traumatized by violence, that shift often brings relief. The mystery seems closer to resolution. But relief can be dangerous. Because relief encourages certainty. And certainty sometimes arrives before evidence deserves it. The case against Maureen relied heavily on circumstantial evidence. There was no dramatic confession. No eyewitness directly identifying him as the killer. No definitive forensic proof placing him beyond doubt at the center of the crime. Instead, investigators assembled a collection of observations, interpretations, and assumptions. Individually, many appeared meaningful. Together, they created a narrative. The problem with narratives is that they can become persuasive even when they are incomplete. Humans are storytelling creatures. We instinctively seek patterns. We connect details. We construct explanations. Once a story begins taking shape, contradictory information becomes easier to dismiss. Investigators are not immune to this tendency. Jurors are not immune to it. Journalists are not immune to it. Entire communities are not immune to it. As the investigation progressed, concerns gradually emerged regarding how evidence was being interpreted. Some experts questioned conclusions. Some observations appeared less definitive than originally believed. Certain witness statements proved problematic. Memories changed. Details shifted. Uncertainty remained. Yet momentum continued building. Momentum is one of the most powerful forces in criminal investigations. Once a case acquires direction, changing course becomes increasingly difficult. Every additional interview reinforces existing assumptions. Every additional report strengthens commitment to the prevailing theory. Eventually, reversing course feels almost impossible. The focus on Maureen intensified. Public perception evolved alongside it. Many people began believing the case had effectively been solved. They simply awaited formal confirmation. The emotional appeal of that conclusion was obvious. A child had been murdered. Investigators had identified a suspect. Justice appeared within reach. Nobody wanted to return to uncertainty. Nobody wanted to admit that questions remained unanswered. Yet unanswered questions continued to exist. Years later, critics would argue that investigators became too invested in a particular theory. That alternative possibilities did not receive adequate attention. That evidence inconsistent with guilt failed to receive sufficient weight. Whether those criticisms were entirely fair remains a subject of debate. What is undeniable is that the investigation increasingly centered on one man. Guy Paul Maureen. As legal proceedings advanced, the atmosphere surrounding the case became more intense. Media coverage expanded. Public interest remained enormous. People followed developments closely. The murder of Christine Jessup had already become one of Canada's most significant criminal cases. Now it appeared to be approaching resolution. But beneath the surface, problems were growing. One of the most troubling aspects of wrongful conviction cases is how convincing they often appear at the time. If innocence were obvious, wrongful convictions would rarely happen. Instead, cases frequently contain evidence that seems persuasive. Investigators sincerely believe they have identified the correct suspect. Prosecutors sincerely believe they are pursuing justice. Jurors sincerely believe they are evaluating facts. Everyone involved may act in good faith. Yet the outcome can still be wrong. The Christine Jessup investigation would eventually become a powerful example of that reality. As scrutiny increased, experts examined forensic evidence available at the time. Compared to modern standards, many forensic techniques of the 1980s possessed significant limitations. Some methods carried greater uncertainty than investigators realized. Some conclusions appeared stronger than they actually were. Scientific understanding evolves. What seems reliable in one era may later reveal weaknesses. The challenge is that legal decisions occur in the present, not the future. Courts must evaluate evidence using available knowledge. They cannot anticipate discoveries decades away. As proceedings continued, Morin found himself facing a nightmare that few people can truly imagine. To be suspected of murdering a child is devastating. To become the focus of national attention while maintaining innocence is even more devastating. Every aspect of life changes. Relationships suffer. Reputations collapse. Ordinary routines disappear. The accusation itself becomes a burden. Whether guilty or innocent, the individual at the center of such allegations becomes trapped within the machinery of the justice system. For Morin, that machinery was accelerating. Meanwhile, the actual killer remained free. That fact is perhaps the most chilling element of this chapter. While investigators concentrated increasingly on one suspect, the real offender continued living outside the spotlight. He watched events unfold from a distance. He observed the investigation. He observed public discussions. He observed a community searching desperately for answers. And all the while, nobody suspected him. The contrast is extraordinary. An innocent man moving closer to conviction. A guilty man moving further from suspicion. Two lives traveling in opposite directions. Neither the public nor investigators recognized it. At least not yet. The case gradually accumulated the appearance of certainty. And appearances matter. Once a suspect becomes publicly associated with a horrific crime, perception begins shaping reality. People interpret behavior differently. Neutral actions acquire sinister interpretations. Ordinary traits become suspicious. Every detail appears meaningful. This phenomenon occurs repeatedly throughout criminal history. Knowledge of an accusation changes how people evaluate information. The accused person stops being viewed as an individual and becomes viewed as a suspect. The distinction is profound. In the years ahead, legal battles surrounding the case would expose serious concerns regarding the investigation. Questions would emerge about evidence handling. Questions would emerge about witness reliability. Questions would emerge about investigative assumptions. But during this period, those future revelations remained hidden. Most observers believed the system was working. Most observers believed progress was being made. Most observers believed justice was approaching. The reality was far more complicated. The search for Christine's killer had produced a suspect. But it had not necessarily produced the truth. That distinction would eventually change everything. Because while investigators focused on Guy Paul Morin, crucial evidence remained silent. Locked inside biological samples collected years earlier. Waiting. Waiting for science to advance. Waiting for technology capable of revealing what human assumptions could not. Waiting for a future generation of investigators to ask different questions. And while that evidence waited, the case continued moving forward along a path that seemed increasingly certain. A path toward accusation. A path toward conviction. A path toward one of the most significant miscarriages of justice in Canadian history. The tragedy of Christine Jessup had already devastated a family. Soon it would devastate another life as well. And the true killer would remain hidden in plain sight, protected not by genius or luck alone, but by the simple fact that everyone was looking in the wrong direction. For decades, the Christine Jessup case existed in a strange state of contradiction. Officially, the legal system had moved forward. Courtrooms had heard evidence. Arguments had been presented. Verdicts had been delivered. Reports had been written. Investigations had been reviewed. From a distance, the machinery of justice appeared to have done its work. Yet beneath the surface, a question refused to disappear. What if everyone had been wrong? That question haunted the case long after headlines faded. It lingered through the 1990s. It lingered through the arrival of a new century. It lingered in legal circles, among investigators, and within the minds of those who continued studying the evidence. The murder of Christine Jessup had become more than a homicide investigation. It had become a symbol of uncertainty, a symbol of institutional failure, a symbol of the terrifying possibility that a child's killer had never truly been identified. As years passed, science advanced in ways investigators from 1984 could never have imagined. The world changed dramatically. Computers became more powerful. Digital records transformed investigations. Forensic laboratories developed techniques once considered impossible. And among those advances, one discipline emerged as perhaps the most revolutionary force in modern criminal justice: DNA analysis. The significance of DNA cannot be overstated. For centuries, criminal investigations relied heavily on witnesses, confessions, circumstantial evidence, and physical observations. DNA introduced something different. A biological signature. A silent witness incapable of lying. When properly collected and interpreted, DNA could reveal truths hidden beyond memory, bias, or assumption. It could connect offenders to crimes. It could exclude innocent suspects. And perhaps most importantly, it could expose mistakes. The Christine Jessup case contained biological evidence collected decades earlier. At the time, investigators preserved it as carefully as possible. No one knew exactly what future technologies might reveal. But those preserved samples remained. Waiting. Stored inside evidence lockers. Silent and untouched. As the years passed, forensic science gradually unlocked secrets hidden within those samples. One of the most dramatic developments involved the ability to exclude suspects through DNA testing. The results proved devastating for the theory that had dominated the case. The biological evidence did not match Guy Paul Morin. The implications were enormous. This was not merely a technical discrepancy. This was a direct challenge to the foundation upon which years of assumptions had been built. If the DNA belonged to someone else, then investigators faced a terrifying possibility. The wrong man had been accused. The wrong man had suffered. And the real killer had escaped. For many observers, that realization felt almost impossible to accept. Entire narratives collapsed. Certainties dissolved. Confidence vanished. The story people believed for years suddenly looked very different. In 1995, Morin was officially exonerated. The legal system acknowledged that a grave injustice had occurred. His conviction was overturned. His name was cleared. Yet exoneration could not restore lost years. It could not erase public suspicion. It could not return opportunities, relationships, or peace of mind. Wrongful convictions create victims of their own. Not equivalent to murder victims, certainly. But victims nonetheless. Lives altered permanently by errors within systems designed to protect the innocent. The fallout extended beyond one individual. Ontario launched an extensive review into how the case had been handled. The resulting examination exposed serious concerns regarding investigative practices. The findings would eventually become known throughout Canada. The justice system had lessons to learn. Painful lessons. Necessary lessons. Yet despite those revelations, one critical problem remained unresolved. If Guy Paul Morin was innocent, then who killed Christine Jessup? That question returned the investigation to where it had started. A murdered child. An unidentified offender. A mystery once again unsolved. Years turned into decades. The case entered the realm investigators call a cold case. The phrase sounds simple. In reality, cold cases are among the most challenging investigations imaginable. Witnesses move away. Memories fade. Evidence deteriorates. Potential suspects die. The passage of time becomes an enemy. Every year reduces the likelihood of traditional investigative breakthroughs. Yet occasionally, time also creates opportunities. Because while memories weaken, technology improves. And technology was about to change everything. By the early 21st century, Forensic science had evolved far beyond the capabilities available in 1984. DNA analysis became increasingly sophisticated. Investigators could extract information from smaller samples. Profiles became more precise. Databases expanded. Cases once considered unsolvable suddenly became vulnerable to new techniques. Then another revolutionary concept emerged: genetic genealogy. At first glance, the idea seems almost unbelievable. Instead of searching directly for a suspect, investigators search for relatives. They analyze DNA profiles and compare them against genealogical databases. Distant family connections become clues. Family trees become investigative maps. Unknown offenders begin leaving trails through biology itself. The technique gained international attention after solving several notorious cold cases. Crimes that had resisted traditional investigations for decades suddenly produced answers. Families who had lost hope received long-awaited breakthroughs. Investigators everywhere took notice, including those working on the Christine Jessup case. The evidence preserved from 1984 still existed. Decades had passed. The world had transformed. Yet the biological traces left by the offender remained. Waiting patiently. Waiting for science to become capable of understanding them. The renewed investigation began carefully. Cold case investigators understand the importance of patience. There is no urgency created by immediate danger. Instead, there is precision. Every step matters. Every conclusion requires verification. Every possibility demands scrutiny. The process unfolded slowly. DNA profiles were examined. Genealogical relationships were explored. Family connections emerged. Names surfaced. Some possibilities were eliminated. Others remained. Gradually, a path began taking shape. The evidence pointed toward a man named Calvin Hoover. Unlike the public narratives that had dominated previous decades, Hoover had never become the central focus of national attention. His name was unfamiliar to most Canadians. Yet investigators found something deeply troubling. Hoover had known the Jessup family. He was not a random stranger. He had lived in the broader area. He occupied the kind of position often overlooked in criminal investigations. Close enough to be trusted. Ordinary enough to avoid suspicion. The emerging picture carried a chilling implication. The person responsible may have existed much closer to Christine's world than many people had imagined. Investigators continued their work carefully. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. A genetic lead alone was not enough. The case demanded certainty. The consequences were too significant. The investigators pursued direct confirmation. And eventually, they obtained it. The DNA profile recovered from evidence connected to Christine's murder matched Calvin Hoover. Not approximately. Not partially. Directly. After 36 years, science had identified the source. The answer had existed all along within biological evidence preserved from the original investigation. The technology simply had not existed to reveal it. The significance of the breakthrough cannot be overstated. One of Canada's most famous unsolved murders suddenly had a name attached to it. A mystery spanning more than 3 decades finally possessed a likely perpetrator. For the first time since 1984, investigators could explain the evidence in a way that aligned with the biological facts. Yet the breakthrough arrived with a cruel twist. Calvin Hoover was already dead. He had died in 2015, 5 years before investigators publicly announced their findings. The timing created a painful reality. The man identified as Christine's killer would never face a criminal trial. There would be no courtroom confrontation. No jury deliberation. No guilty verdict. No sentencing hearing. The opportunity for traditional justice had vanished before the truth emerged. For Christine's family, the revelation carried mixed emotions. After decades of uncertainty, there was finally an answer. A real answer supported by modern science. Not speculation. Not assumption. not circumstantial interpretation. Evidence. Yet answers do not automatically heal wounds. Sometimes they create new emotions. Relief. Anger. Sadness. Frustration. The knowledge that the offender escaped prosecution can feel deeply unsatisfying. Justice delayed often becomes justice denied. Investigators publicly explained their findings. They made clear that had Hoover been alive, he would have faced charges. The evidence was compelling. The conclusions were significant. After decades of confusion, the official narrative of the case changed dramatically. The consequences extended beyond identifying a killer. The breakthrough validated concerns raised by critics for years. The investigation had indeed traveled down the wrong path. The biological evidence had eventually revealed what assumptions failed to recognize. The real offender had never been the man at the center of public suspicion. The real offender had remained hidden elsewhere. This revelation transformed the Christine Jessup case from a tragic murder investigation into something even larger. It became a lesson about the power of forensic science. A lesson about the dangers of tunnel vision. A lesson about humility. Human beings make mistakes. Investigators make mistakes. Prosecutors make mistakes. Experts make mistakes. Science, while not perfect, possesses a unique ability to revisit old conclusions and test them against objective evidence. In this case, science succeeded where assumptions failed. The breakthrough also served as a reminder of how long truth can remain buried. 36 years. An entire generation. Children born after Christine's death had become adults before the mystery was resolved. Many people involved in the original investigation had retired. Some had died. Yet the evidence endured. Patient. Silent. Unchanging. Waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Waiting for technology capable of hearing its answer. And when that answer finally arrived, it rewrote the history of the case. The breakthrough did not erase tragedy. It did not restore lost years. It did not bring Christine back. But it accomplished something profoundly important. It revealed the truth. After decades of uncertainty, after years of controversy, after one of the most notorious wrongful convictions in Canadian history, the darkness surrounding Christine Jessup's murder finally began to lift. The mystery that had haunted a nation for more than 3 decades had at last surrendered its secret. And the secret had been hiding in plain sight all along, preserved within a few microscopic traces of DNA that refused to forget what human memory could not remember. Justice is often imagined as a straight line. A crime occurs. Investigators identify the offender. Evidence is presented. A jury reaches a verdict. A sentence follows. The story ends. Reality is rarely so simple. The Christine Jessup case stands as a powerful reminder that justice is not always a destination. Sometimes it is a long and painful struggle between truth and certainty, between evidence and assumption, between what people believe and what can actually be proven. In many ways, the courtroom battles connected to this case began long before anyone entered a courtroom. They began the moment investigators became convinced they had identified the right suspect. Because once a theory takes hold, every future decision becomes influenced by it. Evidence is interpreted through it. Witnesses are evaluated through it. Questions are asked through it. The path toward trial often begins years before opening statements are ever delivered. When Guy Paul Morin became the focus of the investigation, the machinery of the justice system started moving toward confrontation. Charges transformed suspicion into something more powerful, more dangerous. An accusation made by the state carries enormous weight. To the public, it often feels like proof. People assume authorities would not pursue charges without compelling reasons. People assume investigators know more than they have revealed. People assume the evidence must be overwhelming. But assumptions are not evidence. And one of the most important lessons of this case is that those two things should never be confused. As legal proceedings unfolded, attention intensified throughout Canada. The murder of Christine Jessup had already generated enormous public interest. Now the possibility of a conviction created expectations. Many people believed the case was approaching resolution. Many believed justice for Christine was finally within reach. Inside courtrooms, however, the process was far more complicated. The prosecution sought to present a narrative. A narrative explaining how the crime occurred. A narrative identifying the person responsible. A narrative capable of persuading judges and jurors beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the fundamental challenge of every criminal trial. The legal system cannot punish based on suspicion alone. It requires proof. Or at least proof sufficient to meet legal standards. The prosecution believed it possessed that proof. The defense disagreed. What followed became one of the most controversial legal battles in Canadian criminal history. The details of the proceedings generated debate among lawyers, investigators, forensic experts, journalists, and eventually the broader public. Questions emerged regarding witness reliability. Questions emerged regarding forensic interpretations. Questions emerged regarding investigative methods. At the time, however, many observers focused on a simpler question. Was Guy Paul Morin guilty or not? The complexity hidden beneath that question would take years to fully understand. Courtrooms possess a unique atmosphere. They are places where stories compete. Where evidence acquires meaning. Where lives can be transformed in a matter of hours. For families connected to homicide cases, the experience is emotionally exhausting. The victims' loved ones sit through painful testimony. Graphic details resurface. Memories reopen wounds. Every hearing becomes a reminder of loss. The Jessup family endured that burden while pursuing answers about Christine's death. At the same time, Morin faced the terrifying possibility of spending the rest of his life branded as a child murderer. The stakes could not have been higher. One side sought justice for a murdered child. The other sought to prevent what it believed was a wrongful conviction. The legal battle carried immense emotional weight. Eventually, the outcome appeared decisive. Morin was convicted. The verdict delivered what many people believed was closure. The public saw resolution. The media reported progress. The justice system appeared to have completed its task. For many Canadians, the story seemed finished. The murderer had been identified. The family had received answers. The case had been solved. Yet beneath the appearance of certainty, serious problems remained. History has repeatedly demonstrated that convictions alone do not establish truth. Courtroom victories can be overturned. Scientific discoveries can expose errors. New evidence can transform old conclusions. The legal system strives for accuracy, but it is operated by human beings. And human beings are capable of mistakes. As years passed, doubts surrounding the conviction refused to disappear. Some legal observers questioned aspects of the evidence. Some experts challenged conclusions. Some investigators reconsidered assumptions. Gradually, uncertainty returned. Not publicly at first. Not dramatically. But steadily. Like cracks appearing beneath a structure that once seemed solid. Then science intervened. Advances in DNA testing created opportunities unavailable during earlier stages of the case. Evidence collected years before could now be examined with greater precision. What emerged changed everything. The DNA evidence did not support the conviction. Instead, it pointed elsewhere. The implications were staggering. If the biological evidence excluded Morin, then the foundation supporting years of legal proceedings suddenly looked unstable. The justice system faced an uncomfortable possibility. It had convicted the wrong man. Wrongful convictions represent one of the gravest failures any legal system can experience. The consequences extend far beyond individual suffering. Public trust erodes. Confidence weakens. Questions multiply. If one innocent person can be convicted, people naturally wonder how often similar mistakes occur. The Morin case forced Canada to confront those questions. In 1995, The legal system formally acknowledged its error. Morin's conviction was overturned. His innocence was recognized. His freedom was restored. The announcement marked a dramatic reversal. A man once publicly identified as a murderer was now officially cleared. The transformation was extraordinary. Yet exoneration is not the same as restoration. The years lost remained lost. The damage remained real. No legal ruling can fully repair what wrongful accusations destroy. A person's reputation, relationships, career opportunities, mental well-being. Those wounds often persist long after innocence is established. For Morin, vindication arrived only after enormous personal sacrifice. The legal system eventually recognized that reality. Authorities issued apologies. Compensation followed. Official acknowledgements attempted to address the injustice. But even sincere apologies cannot return stolen years. The fallout from the wrongful conviction extended beyond one man. Ontario launched a comprehensive examination into what had gone wrong. Investigators, lawyers, and policymakers studied the failures. They analyzed decisions. They reviewed procedures. They sought lessons. The resulting findings became enormously influential. The case transformed into a teaching example throughout Canadian legal circles. Not because justice had succeeded. Because justice had failed. The lessons were uncomfortable but necessary. Investigative tunnel vision. Confirmation bias. Over-reliance on uncertain evidence. Institutional pressures. These themes appeared repeatedly. The legal system responded by implementing reforms designed to reduce the risk of similar errors in the future. In that sense, the tragedy produced change. Meaningful change. Yet another painful truth remained. Even after Morin's exoneration, Christine's murderer had not been identified. The wrongful conviction had not merely harmed an innocent man. It had also allowed the actual killer to escape accountability. 4 years. 4 decades. That reality added another layer of heartbreak. Justice had failed in 2 directions simultaneously. The wrong person suffered punishment. The right person avoided it. Cases involving wrongful convictions often reveal this dual tragedy. People focus understandably on the innocent individual. But the original victim remains central. The victim still deserves answers. The victim still deserves truth. Christine still deserved justice. And for many years, genuine justice remained elusive. Then came the breakthrough that reshaped the entire narrative. The DNA evidence preserved from the original investigation eventually identified Calvin Hoover as the source of biological material connected to the crime. After 36 years, the evidence finally pointed toward a different man. A man who had never stood trial. A man who had never faced a jury. A man who had died years earlier. The revelation created an unusual situation. Investigators now possessed powerful evidence identifying the likely offender. Yet there would never be a traditional courtroom proceeding. No prosecution. No defense. No witnesses. No verdict. The most important legal confrontation in the case would never occur. This absence creates a complicated question. Can justice exist without a trial? The answer depends upon how justice is defined. If justice means legal punishment, then the answer may be no. Calvin Hoover never faced criminal consequences. He never sat before a jury. He never heard a guilty verdict. That chapter never happened. But if justice also includes truth, accountability, and historical accuracy, then the answer becomes more complicated. Because the truth finally emerged. The false narrative collapsed. The innocent man was cleared. The evidence identified the likely offender. For many observers, that outcome represented a form of justice, even if it remained incomplete. The Christine Jessup case ultimately reveals that justice is not a single moment. It is a process. A process capable of success and failure. A process that requires constant scrutiny. A process dependent upon humility. The willingness to admit mistakes may be one of the most important qualities any justice system can possess. Without humility, errors become permanent. Without humility, innocence becomes irrelevant. Without humility, truth remains buried. The courtroom battles connected to Christine Jessup's murder left a lasting legacy precisely because they exposed those realities. The legal system convicted a man. The legal system later cleared that man. The legal system learned painful lessons. And decades after the crime, science finally illuminated a truth that courtrooms had failed to uncover. The result was neither a perfect victory nor a complete defeat. It was something more human. A story of mistakes corrected too late. A story of truth delayed but not entirely denied. A story reminding us that justice is strongest not when it claims perfection, but when it possesses the courage to confront its own failures. And in the case of Christine Jessup, those failures would become almost as historically significant as the crime itself. In the end, every true crime story asks the same difficult question. What remains after the case is closed? For Christine Jessup, the answer is not simple. There is no single moment of closure. No final scene where everything becomes peaceful again. No ending that restores what was lost. Instead, there is something more complicated. A mixture of truth, grief, correction, and time. A story that refuses to resolve into a clean conclusion. Christine's murder is often remembered through three overlapping realities. The loss of a child in 1984. The wrongful conviction that followed. And the decades-long silence before the truth finally emerged. Each layer changed how people understood the case. Each layer reshaped public memory. Each layer left its own emotional residue behind. For Christine's family, there is no version of this story that feels complete. The discovery of her remains in 1984 ended hope, but it did not end questions. The conviction of Guy Paul Morin in the 1990s created the impression of justice, but it did not bring peace. The later DNA breakthrough in 2020 corrected a historical wrong, but it arrived long after it could change the past. Even when answers finally came, they came too late to undo the most important damage. Time had already done its work. That is one of the most difficult truths in cases like this. Justice delayed is not just a legal concept. It is an emotional reality lived by real people. Parents age while waiting for answers. Families rebuild lives around absence. Communities learn to carry memories they never wanted. And the victim remains forever fixed in time, untouched by everything that follows. Christine Jessup never grew older. She never reached adulthood. She never had the chance to define herself beyond childhood photographs and memories held by others. In every legal document, every documentary, every retelling of the case, she remains 9 years old. Frozen in a moment that should have been only the beginning. The offender, Calvin Hoover, is also part of this frozen timeline. His life ended in 2015, long before science connected him definitively to the crime. That fact creates a strange finality. There will never be a trial. No courtroom testimony. No cross-examination. No public confrontation between truth and denial. The case exists in a space outside traditional justice. Solved in a forensic sense. Unresolved in a legal sense. Final in fact. Incomplete in process. That contradiction is what makes the Christine Jessup case so enduring in public memory. It is not just a murder investigation. It is a story about how truth moves through time. Sometimes quickly. Sometimes slowly. Sometimes too late to matter in the way people hope. It is also a story about systems built by humans. Systems capable of remarkable achievements. And equally capable of profound mistakes. The wrongful conviction of Guy Paul Morin remains one of the most significant legal failures in Canadian history. But it is also one of the most important catalysts for reflection and reform. The case forced investigators, prosecutors, and policymakers to confront uncomfortable realities. How easily assumptions can harden into certainty. How persuasive incomplete narratives can become. How vulnerable investigations are to pressure, expectation, and bias. These lessons did not come cheaply. They came at the cost of years in an innocent man's life. At the cost of public trust. And at the cost of a killer remaining free for decades. When the DNA breakthrough finally identified Calvin Hoover, it did more than solve a cold case. It exposed the limits of earlier understanding. It showed how evidence can wait silently for science to evolve. It demonstrated that truth does not disappear, even when it is ignored or misinterpreted. It simply waits for the tools capable of revealing it. The use of genetic genealogy in this case marked a turning point. It reflected a new era of forensic investigation, where even decades-old crimes can be revisited with fresh eyes. Cases once thought unsolvable are no longer permanently closed. They remain open in a different sense. Waiting for new methods. Waiting for new interpretations. Waiting for someone to ask again what really happened. For investigators working on cold cases, this represents both hope and responsibility. Hope that victims may still receive answers. Responsibility to re-examine old assumptions with humility. Because the past is not always what it appears to be. The Christine Jessup case demonstrates that clearly. A child disappeared in 1984. A community searched. A nation mourned. A suspect was identified. A conviction followed. Then everything changed. Not once, but twice. First through exoneration. Then through DNA identification of a different offender. Each stage reshaped the meaning of the case. Each stage revealed something new about truth and error. In the broader view, this case is no longer just about one tragedy. It is about the evolution of justice itself. How it learns. How it fails. How it corrects itself, sometimes slowly, sometimes painfully. And how it always remains unfinished. For those who lived through it, there is no simple takeaway. For Christine's family, there is no version of events that feels resolved. For the wrongfully accused, there is no version of justice that fully restores what was taken. For society, there is only reflection. The awareness that certainty must always be questioned. That evidence must always be carefully weighed. That truth is not always immediately visible. And that the consequences of error can last for generations. The story of Christine Jessup does not end with a conviction. It does not end with an exoneration. It does not end with a DNA match. It ends, instead, in a quieter place. A place where truth has finally surfaced, but cannot undo the past. A place where answers exist, but healing remains incomplete. A place where a child's name is remembered not only for what happened to her, but for everything her story revealed about the systems meant to protect her. In that sense, Christine Jessup's legacy is not defined solely by loss. It is defined by what followed that loss. The warning it left behind. The reforms it inspired. The humility it demanded from justice systems. And the reminder that behind every case file is a human life that once contained an entire future. A future that never had the chance to unfold. And a truth that, even after 36 years, finally found its way to the surface. When a case like Christine Jessup's finally reaches its end in the historical sense, there is a temptation to believe the story has been completed. A name has been identified, evidence has been reinterpreted, and the long silence of uncertainty has been replaced with a clearer outline of what likely happened. But true crime rarely offers the comfort of true endings. What it offers instead is aftershock. A slow emotional echo that continues long after the facts are known, reshaping how people think about justice, memory, and loss. Christine Jessup's story now exists in that space between resolution and permanence. The biological evidence points with strong certainty toward Calvin Hoover as the person responsible for her abduction and murder. The wrongful conviction of Guy Paul Morin has been acknowledged and corrected. The historical record has been rewritten with more accurate information than what was available in the 1980s and 1990s. And yet none of these developments can reach backward in time to alter the reality of what was endured. For Christine's family, the passage of decades did not translate into distance from pain. Time does not function as a barrier against grief in the way people often assume. Instead, it changes the shape of grief. What begins as shock becomes memory. What begins as searching becomes reflection. What begins as hope eventually becomes something quieter, more complicated, and often heavier. Even with answers, the emotional weight does not vanish. It simply changes form. There is also the reality that justice, in its legal sense, is bound by the limits of human timing. Calvin Hoover's death in 2015 closed the door on any possibility of trial. That absence creates a strange finality that is difficult to reconcile with the expectations people often have about criminal cases. Society is accustomed to seeing justice performed in courtrooms, where accountability is declared publicly and formally. In this case, the truth arrived outside that structure, arriving instead through science and retrospective investigation. The result is clarity without ceremony, certainty without judgment. That gap between truth and process is one of the most important lessons embedded in this case. It shows that justice is not a single event but a sequence of imperfect mechanisms attempting to align with reality. Sometimes they succeed. Sometimes they fail. And sometimes they correct themselves only after years have passed, long after the individuals most affected can benefit from that correction in any meaningful way. The wrongful conviction of Guy Paul Morin remains one of the most significant aspects of this case, not because it overshadows Christine's murder, but because it reveals how easily certainty can emerge in the absence of complete truth. His experience demonstrates how investigative focus, public expectation, and institutional momentum can converge into a powerful narrative that feels correct at the time, even when it is not. The later DNA evidence did not merely exonerate him. It exposed the fragility of the assumptions that led to his conviction in the first place. This duality is what makes the Christine Jessup case so enduring in legal and cultural memory. It is simultaneously a story of violent loss and a story of systemic correction. It is a reminder that truth can exist independently of belief, and that belief can persist even when truth is elsewhere. It is also a reminder that every stage of an investigation, from the first search to the final forensic breakthrough, is shaped by human limitation. Modern forensic genealogy, which ultimately identified Calvin Hoover, represents one of the most transformative developments in criminal investigation in recent decades. It allows cold cases to be revisited with tools that operate far beyond the capabilities of earlier eras. In Christine's case, it did not simply add a new layer of evidence. It fundamentally changed the direction of the entire narrative. It demonstrated that even cases considered closed or resolved can still hold undiscovered truths within preserved evidence. Yet even this technological breakthrough cannot be separated from its emotional consequences. For those who lived through the original investigation, the reopening of the case decades later is not just a scientific event. It is a reopening of memory, a return to old grief. A reminder that what was once believed to be settled was, in fact, incomplete. There is also a broader lesson about how societies process tragedy. High-profile cases often become symbols that extend beyond their immediate facts. Christine's case became a symbol of childhood vulnerability, of investigative error, and of forensic advancement. Each of these interpretations carries part of the truth, but none of them fully contain the human reality at the center of the story. The individual life of a child risks being abstracted into legal and scientific discourse, even when the intention is to honor her memory. That tension is unavoidable in true crime storytelling. It requires constant awareness that every detail belongs to a lived experience, not just a narrative structure. Christine Jessup was not an entry in a historical record. She was a child whose life was interrupted in the most irreversible way possible. All later developments, whether legal, scientific, or procedural, exist in relation to that central fact. As time continues to move forward, the case will likely remain part of discussions about forensic science, wrongful convictions, and cold case resolution. It will be studied in academic settings, referenced in legal reforms, and analyzed in media narratives. But for those who approach it with care, the most important takeaway is not procedural. It is human. It is the understanding that justice systems must remain open to correction. That certainty must always be questioned when evidence allows. That scientific progress has the power to reshape history. And that behind every investigation is a life that cannot be recovered, regardless of how accurate the final explanation becomes. In the end, the story of Christine Jessup does not conclude with resolution in the traditional sense. It concludes with awareness. Awareness of what was lost. Awareness of what was misunderstood. Awareness of what was eventually revealed. And awareness that even when truth arrives, it does not erase the past. It only illuminates it more clearly. And in that light, the case remains what it has always been at its core. Not just a mystery solved, but a reminder. A reminder of the fragility of certainty, the cost of error, and the enduring need to seek truth with both rigor and humility, even when it arrives too late to change the outcome.